Welcome back to the Dirt Diaries Explorers. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a new episode or a new archaeology find. And today I'm actually joined by my little co-pilot today. She loves being on camera. I'm surprised she hasn't been on sooner. And if you are listening to this as a podcast, don't forget to like, rate, and comment. It really helps me out. And if you're new here, welcome. I hope you love ancient history, ancient art, mythology, mystery, and more as much as I do. Because my name is Dr. Tenninger Kellenberger, and I bring the ancient world to you. Because no, this is not ancient aliens. This is the real thing. And of course, these are the Dirt Diaries. And of course, a special shout out and hello to those lounging in the villa, taking notes in the library, and snooping in the restricted section over on Patreon. Last time on Dirt Diaries, we really slung our drinks back to see just how Cleopatra beat her lover Mark Antony in a bet of a lifetime. For what? To have one of the most expensive meals ever in history. And of course, she won and showed him. And of course, as the story and legend goes, one of her pearls, the one that was not consumed during the meal, the one pearl that was not consumed, of course, after Rome's victory over Egypt and the death of Cleopatra, well, one of the pearls was brought back to Rome where it was cut in half and placed in the ears of a goddess statue. And because I gotta keep you guys on your toes here at Dirt Diaries, we're heading back in time to look at one of my favorite archaeological artifacts ever, and a main character in my own research that is just over an inch in size, the Pylos combat agate. And yes, while it is just over an inch, it does not matter because boy does it pack a punch. Now, this season on Dirt Diaries, I have already done episodes on the shaft graves of Mycenae, specifically, of course, within Grave Circle A, and looked at ancient weapons in the Aegean world and in Egypt, both mythological and real, and even looked at the role that these weapons play in martial iconography. So I highly recommend checking out those episodes before this one today because they play into this find and the larger concepts of what my research is currently working on. But for this agate, not only do we have to break open our mythology books and our Homeric epics, but we have to go further back in time to the Bronze Age, on the mainland of Greece over 3,400 years ago. The site of Pylos, also pronounced Pylos, I've heard it many different pronunciation. Well, this site is actually located on the western side of Greece. So, if you are wondering how far this is from Athens because you are more comfortable basing things in proximity to Athens, well, it's located about 3.5 hours southwest of Athens. And if you're wondering how far it is from Mycenae, it is about a 2.5 hour drive. And Pylos is a palatial site, which means it has a palace. And of course, because it has ties with Greek mythology and Homer's epic, this site was a hot topic of archaeology back in the day, in a similar manner that Troy and Mycenae were. Everybody wants to find something. And why is this? Oh, well, it's because, the site of Mycenae was really believed to be where the heroes of Greece and heroes of the Trojan War on the Greek side were buried. But Pylos also had ties to a legendary figure itself, that of the legendary king Nestor. So the desire to find this palatial site and the palace of Nestor is really nothing new. It's nothing that we haven't already seen, but everywhere that excavations were occurring that somehow had ties to the famed site of Pylos and Nestor himself, they weren't turning anything up. And even our buddy Schliemann, when he wasn't digging at Troy or Mycenae, well, he was also trying to look for this as well. In fact, he excavated the medieval site of Navarino in search of something similar to what he uncovered at the site of Mycenae earlier. And of course, he found so many treasures and Grave Circle A. So a hop, skip, and a jump into the 20th century. Well, a school teacher actually stumbled upon something really crazy. In fact, this school teacher stumbled across a 13th century BCE limestone block that was actually also associated with Mycenaean pottery. Jackpot. And the Mycenaean pottery dated to the same period, and these were both uncovered in an olive grove that overlooked the Bay of Navarino. And after these findings were found, well, they were reported to the proper authorities. And because they were reported properly, discussions actually began around conducting excavations here. Perhaps this is where the famed Palace of Nestor actually resides. So enter in another archaeologist, Carl Blagan. Now, he was from the University of Cincinnati, and he also would dig Troy. He would dig Troy in the way that we wish Schliemann did, but incredible archaeologist. Now, when talks of a joint expedition and excavation were occurring, well, Carl Blagan was already going to dig at Troy. So it actually pushed the excavations back until 1939. So once Blagan comes back to dig here, everybody is ready to make a discovery of a lifetime. Everybody has been waiting for this palace to be found. Palaces and the finding of palaces, you guys, is so fascinating and so interesting to see, because sometimes these palaces, they go missing, as you know, the one here at Pylos did. But sometimes, like the Palace of Knossos on Crete, well, the locals actually knew about it. So it's really interesting to see when palatial sites either go missing in history or the locals in the area are like, oh yeah, it's just the palace down the road kind of deal. But super interesting nonetheless. So this excavation and team, they were really interested in what they were going to uncover. Is this finally the time and the site that we are going to uncover this palace from myth? And well, only on the first day of excavations, boy, did they find basically the finding of a lifetime. And in archaeology, there's always jokes around the fact of you don't find something or the most important find until the last day of your excavation season. And from the excavations I've been on, that actually holds pretty true. Literally, you will be beginning to backfill the site and prepping it for the next season and finishing up, your squares and everything. And cuckoo, what do you know? You find one of the most important things of the season. It has rang true for me, but Carl Blagan and the excavations here, they had the opposite, because on day one, you guys, they uncovered incredible shit. They actually uncovered what would be now known as the archives of the palace, which was chock full of Linear B tablets, just sitting there waiting to be uncovered. And of course, these tablets were written in what we know today as Linear B. And Linear B was not new at this point in time, because Sir Arthur Evans had already dug the Palace of Knossos on Crete. And by this point in time, his multi-volume publications had come out on the excavations and his findings. And I believe there's 4 volumes, and they are entitled The Palace of Minos. I used to have certain pages in that book memorized because me and my colleagues were tasked with digitally reconstructing the throne room at Knossos. So I used to know that like the back of my hand. Anywho, because of the work done by Sir Arthur Evans, archaeologists in the realm of the prehistory of the Aegean world, they were already well aware of Linear B. And the documents that were found in the palace archives, and by documents, I don't mean pieces of paper that, are very important, but these are clay tablets. And the reason that we have them today is because when the massive fires and destruction took place, it actually hardened the clay so much that they were preserved, which pretty great. But I kind of spoiled it. The palace was ultimately destroyed, but we'll get there. But in the archives, in the documents, well, it was denoted that there was a complex social and economic system at the site that was headed and backed by a wanox. And you might be wondering, what is a wanox? So a wanox is a title, and really it can mean king. It can also mean lord, depending on where you are in the world, but it is the masculine form of it. So it's going to be king, lord, all of that kind of stuff. If you're wondering what the feminine version of the word is, it is going to be wanasa, and that is going to mean queen, lady, etc. But from these documents, archaeologists were already able to tell that this likely belonged to part of a palace, and because of the complex social and economic things that were being denoted in these tablets, they were on the right track of, figuring out if this is the palace or not. Now, the buildings and the archive that Blagin and his team discovered on day one of excavations, well, they dated to the end of the Bronze Age. So it's going to be the very end of the late Bronze Age, just after the turn of the 12th century BCE, which, of course, if you know anything about the end of the Bronze Age, that is basically beginning the countdown to the ultimate collapse. And investigations over the years of the building structures of the palace here have actually shown that the entire site had an incredibly long history of settlement, meaning people have been here for quite a bit of time. In fact, going so far as back 1,000 years before the site had a palace. And finds associated with the earliest architecture dated to the early Helladic II period, which is roughly 2600 BCE and some change. And quick little side note before we continue, because we are talking about a site on the mainland of Greece. When you are studying or looking at the prehistory of the Aegean world, there are technically 3 chronologies. So it's all based on location. So for example, if you're wondering about the Minoans and the people on Crete, well, their chronology is going to be the Minoan chronology. So it's really easy. It's just like Egypt, where we get, 3 major periods. It's going to be the early, the middle, and the late Minoan periods. And then within it, there could be early Minoan 1, early Minoan 2. It could be late Minoan 1A. It could be late Minoan 1B, and so forth. So that is the Minoan chronology that we use for the island of Crete. Now, if you are wondering what we use for the Cycladic islands, like modern-day Santorini, which was ancient Thera, well, that is going to be the Cycladic chronology. So again, early Cycladic, middle Cycladic, late Cycladic. It is actually shorthanded as EC for early Cycladic, MC, middle Cycladic, LC, late Cycladic. Same thing on Crete, I should have said. For the Minoan chronology, early Minoan, going to be EM, and then whatever phase, middle Minoan, MM, late Minoan, LM. Now, for the mainland, so when we're looking at sites like Pylos and Mycenae and others, well, we're going to be using the Helladic chronology. Again, it's going to be the same thing of early, middle, late, and shorthanded as EH for early Helladic, MH for middle Helladic, and LH for late Helladic. And late Helladic does get tricky when we are looking at the phasing for late Helladic 3, because there's also late Helladic 3A, late Helladic 3B, and late Helladic 3C, which is very, very close in time to one another because we are getting to the very, very end of the Bronze Age. Okay, I just wanted to throw that in before we continue. And the palace and the palatial architecture at this site actually has a few phases. So different building phases of, you might start with a smaller palace and then, build on later on in time. And this is nothing new. This is nothing, unique for a palatial site. We see this a lot on the island of Crete as well. But by 1600 BCE, we have basically the older palace. And by 1400 BC, 200 years later, we get the palace as Blagin and his team excavated it. Basically what remains today if you were to go to the site. And this palace, this last phase of it, it was destroyed in about 1180 BCE. And if you've ever read Eric Klein's 1177 BC, highly recommend you do. If you ever want to learn about the collapse of the Bronze Age, absolutely love Dr. Klein. But that's right at that time period where a lot of cultures in the Mediterranean world are already going through destruction. The sea peoples are moving. Internal turmoil is already beginning and coming, to a head point and everything. It's really, really fascinating. We will 100% be doing a deep dive into the collapse of the Bronze Age one day. Okay, so like every palace, what do you need but a throne room? So the throne room at the Palace of Nestor is actually really interesting. It's really, really beautiful as it's been reconstructed today. The decorative program of the room, which has been partially restored, really emphasize the Wanox and his position. And it's very similar in its restoration, as you can see here in its reconstruction, to what we see at the Palace of Knossos. Because we see lions, we see griffins, this is really highlighting the power that the One-Ox had in between the fantastical and the mortal realms. He has all of this power, so it's being highlighted through the artistic narrative. And in the center of the throne room, as you can see here, actually is a central hearth. And yes, the central hearth was actually plastered and painted as well with little flame designs. The floor was also patterned, and it actually kind of makes like a little checkerboard pattern for the entire floor, which all of the checkerboard squares are decorated with geometric patterns in them. So instead of it being black and white today as we know a checkerboard pattern, they're actually filled individually with geometric designs inside, except for one square, which I love. This one's probably my favorite because it has actually a little octopus inside of it. Now, unlike other palatial sites on the mainland like Mycenae, well, this site really wouldn't be a central focus of worship by later Greeks. So, of course, the character of the legendary king of Pylos is that of Nestor. And of course, we see Nestor in Homer's epic poetry, where by the time of the Trojan War, he's already pretty old by the time we meet him and we're introduced to him. Now, after the war, of course, because the Greeks were there for quite some time, Nestor and his men, they recognize the job is done and we are going home. So him and his men go home. And of course, later on in the epic, that is where Nestor will actually greet Odysseus's son, Telemachus, and so forth and so on as the story, progresses. I know the Iliad and the Odyssey were written pre-7th century BCE, but spoiler alert. And of course, that story is just very much spark noted because we got a lot to cover today. So, yes, Carl Blagan and the excavation team, they did discover the Palace of Nestor, as it is called today. And while the palace and the site was excavated throughout the 20th century, this is not exactly where the tomb of the Griffin Warrior and the Pylos combat agate were discovered. Nay, they weren't found in the palace. No, the grave was located outside of it. In fact, this entire grave was discovered right near Tholos tomb 4. And Tholos tomb is just a tomb type. You may recognize it as it is called elsewhere as a beehive tomb. We could do a whole episode on different tomb types. I know for those on Patreon, we did go over tomb types in the Mediterranean world, specifically in the Aegean, and Tholos are part of it. The plural of Tholos is Tholoi, and they usually have multiple inhumations in them. Anywho, when the discovery of the Griffin Warrior and his tomb were announced, it is actually because excavations had trenches being opened between Tholos number 4 and the northeast gateway, as well as trenches being opened in the Acropolis during the 2015 season. Yes, this find, pretty new. I remember when the updates were coming out that they were able to dig here and everything. And man, I remember when the news broke about the Pylos combat agate after it went through, cleaning photographs and more. I just remember being it was 2015, 2016, I think it came out. So I was in my master's program at this point, and my one professor at Penn was showing it to us, and I just remember being literally speechless and like starstruck at this beautiful piece of history that was literally being uncovered as we spoke during that time. It was so cool, and this piece has been used in my work quite a bit. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Now, within the first day of excavations, much like their predecessors, the 2015 excavation team made an incredible discovery on day one. And to be part of something like this, I could not imagine what that would feel like. Like, if there were ever some excavation teams I wanted to be a part of, it would definitely have been the Tomb of the Griffin Warrior during this excavation season. It would have been working with Sir Leonard Woolley at the Royal Cemetery at Ur. It would have been working with Howard Carter as he excavated King Tut's tomb. Like, that for me is what this grave is on par with. And a special shout out, if any of you guys know or follow Flint Dibble, Dr. Flint Dibble on YouTube, he is Archaeology with Flint Dibble. He actually was part of the excavation team. So shout out Flint, you've lived my dream. Now, while their predecessors discovered the archives of the palace, this team discovered something pretty extravagant themselves. So near the Dromos of Tholos IV, the corner of a small structure was uncovered. And you may be wondering, what is a dromos? A dromos, for those wondering, is really a passageway that leads you to the Tholos entrance itself. Dromos are also seen in rock-cut chamber tombs as well. So it's really kind of the pathway to go inside. If you have ever been to the treasury of Atreus at the site of Mycenae and you are walking up into the entrance of the tomb today, that is the dromos. And they can be pretty long too. Okay, anywho, so that's a dromos. So just days after the corner of this structure was uncovered, well, it became clear to archaeologists working here that the corner actually belonged to a stone-built chamber. And a week after that, it was pretty clear that the stone-built chamber was a completely undisturbed tomb dating to the Bronze Age. Like, chills. I would have chills if I was on that site. So with excavations inside the grave was basically the inhumation of one individual. So one person was buried inside. And the body belonged to a man who died between the ages of 30 and 35 years old. He was interred on his back and was surrounded with incredible burial goods where he would remain untouched for thousands of years. Measurements of his skeletal remains give us an estimated height between about 1.65 meters and 1.7 meters. So roughly about 5'4" to 5'6". So he would stand about a few inches shorter than me. For reference, well, on a good day, I feel like I've shrunk. On a good day, I used to be 5'8", but I think I'm a little closer to 5'7" now, so he would just be right below me. Now, the hundreds of burial goods that were discovered within his tomb and surrounding him were incredible. I mean, are incredible. We still have them today. And they include fine objects and beads made out of amethyst, gold, amber, agate, carnelian, glass, and more. There were also gold vessels, silver vessels, over 50 seal stones. There was also a beautiful gold chain necklace with agate beads and a faience bead, a griffin plaque, which lent its name to the Griffin Warrior, fun fact, combs, bronze vessels, tools, weapons, like swords, and more. Honestly, if we were to go over all of the published finds from this grave, we could do a whole episode on it and it would probably be about 18 hours long. We actually have evidence of cloth fibers and wood that was actually preserved where they adhered to bronze or silver, and the clothing fibers may actually hint at a burial shroud. Which, of course, this would help us in understanding the burial customs of the Bronze Age. Now, in some of the burial goods that I mentioned, we find some very close parallels in the archaeological record that we already knew about, some of which would come from other mainland sites like Mycenae. We also see them coming from burials on Crete as well. So a lot of these finds, we have seen parallels in the archaeological record. Now, you may be wondering the date of the Griffin Warrior, this man who died between the ages of 30 and 35 years old. Well, the date that scholars have proposed and agree on really dates to the late Helladic II period, specifically the earlier portion of it, making it late Helladic IIa. And late Helladic II is roughly 1450 to 1400 BCE. So if we're looking at late Helladic IIa, think 1450 to 1425 BCE. Now, on the right side of his body, thanks to excavation notes and reports, 4 gold rings were discovered on this side. It's just beneath the gold necklace. The gold necklace was up by his head. The gold rings were near his right side, but the Pylos combat agate was actually located near his right pelvis. Now, while the placement of the seal was noted in July of 2015, it was July 18th, it really wasn't commented on for quite some time, even when it was removed on July 31st of 2015. It was just noted as a seal stone was discovered. Why, you might be wondering, why was there no, more comment when we literally have this beautiful, breathtaking martial scene on this seal? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's because they had 4 gold rings that kind of took precedence, and their focus was there. And I don't blame them. It makes total sense, because when the seal stone of the Pylos combat agate was discovered, it was face down. So the Pylos combat agate, for reference, is only decorated on one side. So face down, they just thought it was just a seal stone. They didn't know. I don't blame them. Even when it was taken out and photographed, again, the side that was visible to the archaeologists wasn't decorated. So no one knew that there was actually treasure on the other side. They were focusing on the actual treasure that they could see. So makes sense. Which, in my opinion, it kind of makes for a better story of going after the gold first and not realizing what you're actually sitting on top of. And then through conservation and everything, you are able to uncover this incredible scene of martial iconography that completely resets the conversation that we are having today. And it was only during cleaning and conservation that the world was introduced to this scene. Oh, all right. So let's finally talk about the Pylos combat agate, the main artifact of today's podcast. And I've, at this point in my life, studied it for years now. It was part of my master's thesis. It was part of my dissertation. It's part of my article in press. It's part of my ongoing and current research as well. I feel like at some point I truly just want to get an image of it tattooed on myself. I personally would love that. So, the man, the myth, the legend, the victorious warrior on the Pylos combat agate. So, this is a seal stone, and it is made out of banded agate, and it's pierced at either end. So think of it kind of like a bead. You could string something through it. It's pierced. And you may be wondering, well, Ten, in previous episodes, we've been able to narrow down an origin on certain artifacts, certain raw materials, copper, sometimes gold. We're still struggling with tin, but it has been done. So do we know the origin here? And right, you are. A great question to ask. Unfortunately, we don't. Unfortunately, and I don't mean to laugh, but agate really does not narrow down an origin. I wish it was different. So agate is found throughout the mainland of Greece, and it's also a common material for Cretan seal stones as well that were created during the Neopalatial period. So it doesn't really help out in that aspect. So the excavators, Dr. Sharon Stocker and Dr. Jack Davis, they are husband and wife, and they are University of Cincinnati. I love Dr. Stocker and Davis, incredible people. They also have noted in multiple publications that because the mainland of Greece at this point in time lacked workshops that would have been able to produce a seal like this one, they've suggested and postulated that the piece was actually an inter-Aegean import and was likely imported from Crete and Cretan artisans, or Minoan artisans, I should say. And that is actually a common belief when we look at the Mycenaean peoples and mainlanders in the Bronze Age as compared to the Minoans and the Cretans on Crete, is that if it's really good art, it has to come from Crete. And if it's swords and militaristic and martial, it has to come from the mainland. And yeah, it's really interesting to note because the Minoans in the realm of studying, martial iconography, an elite warrior class and everything, Crete and the Minoans are often painted as the flower-loving Minoans, where it's the martial, war-loving Mycenaeans. And through my own work, that's just not true. But, you know, for right now, because we have yet to discover a palatial workshop that could have produced something like this, the belief is that it was likely imported from Crete. Alrighty, so let's break down the scene because we gotta talk about these characters because they all play a massively important role. So from left to right, there are 3 figures in the scene, 2 active with 1 already defeated or even deceased. So figure A, he is of course the winner in this scene. He is who Stalker and Davis have termed the victorious warrior, and we'll get to that character in a little bit. And he really commands the scene with impressive force. He himself in the scene is a force to be reckoned with. He strides forward with his left leg in a lunge over the fallen warrior. He has long curled hair that flows down his back, and his face is carved in profile, and he wears a 2-stranded necklace. The ties for the necklace, actually, you can see it right behind his hair. There are 2 strands, and really these 2 strands and how it's in his hair and everything really highlights the movement and the ferocity of the combat scene. He is in the classic smiting pose with an arm raised above his head, preparing to strike in a downward motion. And in his raised sword arm, he actually wears a bracelet around his wrist. In his right hand is a sword. We love swords here. And Stalker and Davis have noted that the sword type is likely type A or a type B sword due to similarities that have been uncovered with the swords present in the shaft graves from Mycenae. And personally, you know, if you were to ask me, 10, what type of sword do you think it is? Well, I'm so glad you asked because I actually think that it is more along the lines of a horned hilted type B sword because looking at the horned hilt, the stability of said weapon when you are holding it and using it in combat, and its popularity on the mainland. Type B was more popular on the mainland because it's Mycenaean. I'm thinking it's more type B. And it would also fit in terms of the time period as well. Of course, type B, we see it in late Helladic 1 with the shaft graves. We also see it go on later. I believe if I'm thinking correctly of the work done by Malloy, I'm pretty sure in his chronology they are found through the late Helladic 3 period. Yep, I just checked, and they are found through late Helladic 3A. I don't know why I blanked on that chronology. I could tell you its length, its pros, its cons, everything, and the sites that it's been found at, but I knew it went through LH2, the end of LH2, but I couldn't remember if it went also through late Helladic 3. It does. Okay, so why do I think that this fits more of a type B sword? Well, if you recall back on the Bronze and Bloodshed episode, well, type A, because of its length, is extremely fragile and really puts itself at risk of damage by percussive force. And it would also have put more wear and tear on the user's wrist and hand. And, you know, if you're going to be effective in battle, you need to be quick on the draw and quick on, you know, your swings and everything. And because of the length of type A, it actually would have required the user to take more time in between swings, which, as you know, if you're going to be on the battlefield, seconds matter. So in a scene like this one, where we have the victorious warrior against 2 other fighters, one being already defeated or deceased, we don't know. Using the smaller, more mobile, and more tactical type B sword, personally, makes the most sense. And of course, similar horned type swords have been uncovered from the shaft graves from Grave Circle A at Mycenae. There are a few really great examples at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. I was just there and got to say hello to the swords. And also, a horned sword has been uncovered in the grave of the Griffin Warrior. So back to the character at hand. He reaches his arm over the opponent's figure of 8 shield. And it's named as such because it does look like a figure of 8 when you face it head on. A typical shield of the Bronze Age. The figure of 8 and the rectangular tower shield, very popular. And our victor reaches over the shield of the opponent and grabs the opponent's plume on his helmet. And the arm that is doing the snatching and the grabbing, well, I'm going to give you guys a larger image, but pay attention to our victor's wrist because it looks like he's wearing a seal stone around his wrist. Is he wearing this exact seal stone? We don't know, but how cool is that? Now there's also 2 other bracelets on his wrist as well. And if we look a little closely at his feet, namely around his ankles, it may appear as though he's wearing footwear, but the details just aren't that clear. So it could be footwear or it could be an anklet, so more jewelry, highlighting an elite status. We don't know. Alrighty, moving, through the scene, we get to figure B, who is our fighting figure. He represents the character of the fighter. And in the scene, well, he's losing. Our buddy here is actually having his head forcibly moved to the side because, again, the victor is grabbing the plume on the helmet and is really ripping his neck to the side in order to put his own sword through the flesh right here, which is going to be a fatal strike each and every time. Now, his plumed helmet is really, really interesting because on the side, we get a spiral design in relief. And it's been proposed by Dr. Stalker and Davis that this helmet could possibly be made out of metal, or the design could be made out of metal and may have been an attachment. We don't exactly know. No good it did here, unfortunately, for our buddy. And just below his chin is, right over his shoulder, is actually the strap, likely from the Figure of 8 shield. Now, the Figure of 8 shield being present here is important for a number of reasons. The first being that there's really only a handful of examples of representations of this shield type being actually used in combat, with 2 depictions being found in the shaft graves at Mycenae. Now, while the Figure of 8 shield is great for full body coverage and protection, well, this shield likely would have been heavy and, due to its size, would not have allowed for swift movements to be made. Especially when you're in active combat, that is going to matter. That could be the difference between life and death. So our fighter, he holds a socketed spear with a clear and defined midrib in his right arm. Now, while spears and lances are useful in long range, and you could even argue for mid-range combat as well, they are likely ineffective when we get to close range combat. Our fighter wears a kilt with a decorative pattern on it made of geometric designs, and it's a little bit blocked by his shield, but we can still see it. But what's interesting is that the designs on our fighter's kilt matches the designs and pattern on the kilt of the fallen warrior, which may represent that they are allied or they are from the same group. We don't know, but it's very interesting to note who our victor is fighting and that they can be grouped together. There is a distinct notion in this seal already of the other and othering these fighters here, who the victorious warrior is up against. And then we get to Figure C, who is the fallen figure. Yeah, unfortunately for him, it's not looking good. And while he lays at the bottom of the scene itself, well, our victorious warrior, he's very careful to not step on this man as he goes to kill his other ally. And the fallen man's arms lie limp at his side, with his right arm over his head in a truly defeated posture. And on the ground behind him is a really well depicted horned hilted sword. Now, Grave 5 from Grave Circle A at Mycenae has an excellent parallel to the sword. Now, this scene is really important and just utterly incredible for the study of martial iconography in the Aegean during the Bronze Age, and for looking at the idea and theory of an emerging elite warrior class that may have been present earlier on Crete and then, of course, became part of the mainland culture. And for my own work, I have proposed that these characters have certain qualifications and have certain names, and that we should be moving forward calling them as such. So the characters in certain instances should be the victorious warrior, the fighter, and the fallen, all which are present here. So Figure A, of course, the victor. He is the pinnacle of what the victorious warrior represents in martial iconography during the Bronze Age in the Aegean. Because he is termed the victorious warrior, he only fights with a sword. He does not even have any defensive armor on him. Why? Because he doesn't need it. He doesn't need all that extra kind of fluff for him to become victorious. Now, in this scene, we can even, speculate that he might be elite or from an upper class family because of the amount of jewelry that he does wear. We also see examples of victors who are wearing jewelry such as necklaces from Minoan Crete. And the victorious warrior here remains in total control and is fully composed as he fights 2 against 1. And he's already defeated one. And figure B, so the fighter, he clearly represents the fighter character who is actively trying to save himself or to take the victor down with him. It's almost kind of like a last stand in a sense. And the presence of the fighter character, especially in a scene that is tripartite, is the fact that we are getting more of a narrative in this little scene. We are seeing that the victorious warrior has already defeated one person, but this last remaining individual is standing in his way from total and utter victory. It adds more complexity into who this character is. Now, the weaponry of the fighter character is very typical of the warrior's panoply during this time period. And although our fighter has offensive and defensive weaponry, he cannot best the victorious warrior. And of course, the final character here is that of the fallen figure. And really the purpose that I have proposed of the fallen figure is to add depth in the story of the victorious warrior and really creates this incredible heroic narrative about this victorious warrior as well. Now, of course, if certain qualifications that I proposed are not met for certain martial scenes in the Bronze Age in the Aegean, well, then we should be calling these not the fighter or the victorious warrior, but we should be calling them the victor and the victim. Now, in the Aegean, the figure of the victorious warrior was a symbol of leadership. It became a symbol of power that was obtained through struggle, which may have visually legitimized the elite social standing of the Minoans on Crete and the emerging ruling class on the mainland, such as at the sites of Pylos and Mycenae. Now, a big question that I get and I have thought about myself is the victorious warrior based on a real person? Or is this a mythical scene? Or was he from an oral tradition? I've also asked myself, was he, who people in the military of, the emerging militaristic elite, was he an emblem of who these men were striving to be? And therefore, was he a status that was seen as achievable? These are all concepts and questions that I've either asked myself in the past or am currently trying to tackle and better understand in my own current research. Especially when we think of if this is representative of an emerging elite individual. Is it an individual or is it based on a family of somebody in your family got to this status? Especially when we look even broader at how kingdoms during this time period are being represented by fantastical and really almost legendary beasts. For many, they have speculated that the griffin is an emblem of the Minoans on Crete and the ruling class there. People have also speculated, I believe it was Jack Davis who speculated, that they should have actually termed the Griffin Warrior that of the Lion Warrior, because in the artwork that has been uncovered, there are depictions of lions actually attacking and beating the griffin, and lions could be representational of Mycenae as a site, as a kingdom itself. It could also be representational of Pylos in the mainland. We just don't know. So are these kind of emblems of ruling houses? Kind of think, Game of Thrones of what are the emblems of the different houses? Are we seeing something similar here on the mainland, on Crete, in the Bronze Age, in the Aegean world? I don't know, but it's so fascinating to think about, especially if Pylos is also represented by a griffin. Are we seeing the merging of households together with griffin and lion? Is it, veiled threats at different kingdoms, as it's been proposed when we look towards kingdoms in the east of the Mediterranean world, how they are sending each other gifts with different animals to represent the different kingdoms fighting against one another? It's so utterly fascinating, but we have so many questions and no answers. But right now, it's really unclear if the individuals, take the Griffin Warrior himself, if he saw himself as the victorious warrior, or whether the funerary objects and burial goods were carefully crafted by the deceased's family members and even community members. Were these carefully curated for a purpose? Maybe that he did not achieve in life, or maybe he did achieve in life. Nevertheless, this motif absolutely played a role in the construction of power within the emerging elite families on both Minoan Crete and the mainland of Greece. And unfortunately, the victorious warrior, the character of him and maybe even his story, seems to right now, from the archaeological record and the evidence that we do have, kind of vanish from use. The Pylos combat agate is actually the latest chronological pieces of martial iconography showing man versus man where the victorious warrior is present. Because after this, the victorious warrior kind of disappears from artwork. We see more of a preference for militaristic training scenes, militaristic, aspects, such as those that are represented on the warrior vase from the 12th century BCE, or even a preference shifting towards men who are hunting wild animals. We see the victorious warrior kind of take a step back a little bit after LH2, and we don't really know why. Because when you look at him, you are instantly drawn to the stories that Homer tells us of in the Iliad. It's so interesting. So who was the victorious warrior? Because he's only around for a little bit of time, at least in the archaeological record that we have so far. Well, in 2022, we got some answers thanks to DNA analysis. For the DNA analysis actually showed that he was of Greek origin, which really put an end to previous claims that he was foreign. And to do this, scientists actually extracted DNA from his skull. And it wasn't only his DNA, but they looked at over 700 samples of DNA to really look at genetics. And his DNA revealed that he grew up local in the area. And it's because of this finding that, of course, Stalker and Davis have gone on to propose that perhaps if he was local, he may have been an elite member of society who later went on to rule. Of course, more evidence is needed from other graves around the site to either confirm or deny this. That dates to around the same time as the Griffin Warrior, but right now, this is a prevalent theory in the field. And you may be wondering, if he was a warrior, maybe he was the one depicted on the combat agate, did he die in battle? The answer is no. From analysis, Jack Davis has commented that he did not die in battle. There were no wounds in his skeletal remains to suggest that. But around the age that he was, we cannot rule out disease right now. Perhaps he succumbed to an illness. But of course, more testing is needed. And a little fun fact for everybody out there, depending on where you are in the world. Well, I know not everybody can get out there to Greece, but if you are planning a summer vacation to Greece next year, the Pylos combat agate and a exhibition is actually going to be at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and it's going to be showing pieces from the tomb of the Griffin Warrior. It's also going to be showing pieces for the first time from the site, from other tombs as well. And it's going to be showing the Pylos combat agate. But if you're in the States like I am, well, boy, do I have a treat for you, because the Getty Villa located in Malibu in California, well, they're getting the exhibition first. It's currently there right now. I think it opened in June, but it actually is going to be open with the Pylos combat agate through the end of 2025. I believe it ends the first part of January in 2026 before it packs up and heads back to Athens. But So cool. I'm already screaming, crying, throwing up. I've already told my sister, my husband, my brother-in-law, I'm dragging all of you to Malibu because we're going to go see this. And yeah, so if you want to go see it in person, you can. It will be at the Getty Villa in Malibu through Christmas. I will be there at Christmas. Maybe I'll see some of you guys there. But that is going to be it for me. I absolutely love this seal. This truly has been part of my research for so many years, and I absolutely love being able to share it all with you. And if you want to come see art that depicts some of Homer's legendary heroes, like that of Odysseus, well, you can come with me to Turkey as we travel back through all the incredible sites of the ancient world, including that of temples and all of the museums. I just got back from a trip to Turkey. I absolutely loved it, and I'm so excited to go back with all of you guys. We, of course, will be looking at artwork that depicts Odysseus, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and of course walking through ancient temples, talking to the Oracle of Apollo, looking at gateways to the underworld, and more. So excited, and as always, keep your books open, stay curious, and I will see you guys next time on the Dirt Diaries.